2022 was an amazing year. We got a lot of fights that we were looking forward to, like the Dustin and Chandler fight, like the Ali Vera and Islam fight, which was my most anticipated fight going into 2022. Volkanovski versus Holloway 3, Gane versus Ngannou. We got a bunch of fights that we were looking forward to, and a lot of them were extremely entertaining. And now looking forward to 2023, there's a lot of great fights that can happen. How likely they are or not, here are the fights I'm looking forward to the most. So the number 5 fight I'm looking forward to going into 2023 is Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler. This is a fight between two of the fastest starters, two of the pound for pound most dangerous fighters in the first round, going at each other at the 170 pound weight class. And yes, Chandler is more than big enough to fight at 170 against someone like Conor. Maybe not someone like Usman, but Conor for sure. The right hand versus the left hand. Who could find that one big punch would most likely end the fight in a flash. The reason why it's number 5 on my list is because you could kind of expect what's going to happen, and it most likely would not go past the first round. So you're not going to see a lot of action, but the action you do see is going to be extremely explosive. Conor comes out there, probing with his long lead hand, try to create distance and time. Chandler is orthodox, right straight, which Conor does very well. Some of Conor's best counter punches are against the right hand of an orthodox fighter, like against Jose Aldo, Eddie Alvarez, Chad Mendes, etc. But if Chandler can fake his way in, maybe even feint a takedown to offset Conor, there is a potential for his dynamite of a right hand to end Conor completely. Chandler has the more pure power in his punch, whereas Conor is more skillful with landing his power punch. Then come the kicks. Conor will use his kicks in order to create some distance and also trap you into a certain zone, box you in with his kicks, so his left hand becomes much easier for him to land. Chandler, on the other hand, his kicks do the same thing as everything else, to destroy you. He kicks low to break your leg. He kicks mid to break your ribs. He kicks high to crush your chin. And Conor, who doesn't check too many leg kicks, could suffer from the impact. But with the southpaw versus orthodoxy, it's much better at checking inside leg kicks, as you saw against Eddie Alvarez in the first round, and even against some of the southpaw Nate Diaz's inside leg kicks as well. And another reason why this fight is not higher on my list is because the fight could be very one-sided if Michael Chandler goes and wrestles right away. But knowing that Chandler will risk his chances of victory in order to put on a show for the fans, we could expect him to come out in that first round and swap hands with Conor. So the electrifying atmosphere, combined with the assurance that the fight would be extremely entertaining and that the fight is going to end with a finish between two of the most exciting fighters in UFC history, I think Conor McGregor vs. Michael Chandler is one of the most anticipated fights going into 2023. Number 4 on my list, I would have to say, is Francis Ngannou versus Jon Jones. This would have been much, much higher if Jones didn't take an eternity to come back. And he's still not back, but there is talks that he's going to fight Ngannou. Francis's corner is saying that he's looking to come back in the first or second quarter of 2023. And if that is against Jon Jones, we have potentially one of the greatest heavyweights of all time, and for sure the scariest heavyweight of all time, versus potentially the greatest fighter, period. How can this skill trump that much power? Can the greatest amount of skill at the heaviest weight class trump the most powerful? That is what the fight would represent. But the fact that Jones hasn't fought in so long, we can expect him to not come back the same. But if there is anybody who can, if there is anybody who has the fight IQ, the intellect to come back and make things work, it would be a genius in the octagon like Jon Jones. Jon Jones is one of the smartest fighters we've ever seen at making adjustments mid-fight, at coming up with game plans, and even able to shut out opponents where they're at their strongest. And he does it using intelligent techniques. Can he figure out the powerhouse that is Ngannou? He's never fought anybody that big before. He's never fought anybody that powerful before. A legitimate fighter who can knock him out with one punch. It's the scariest challenge in Jones' career, and it has so many stakes. If Ngannou beats Jon Jones, you could even consider him the greatest heavyweight of all time. If Jones beats Ngannou, the PED will always taint his legacy, so I can never claim that he's the greatest, even if he beats Ngannou. But removing that asterisk, Jones may not only be the greatest MMA fighter of all time, he may be the greatest fighter, period, in any sport, and potentially the scariest man to walk on the planet, including size. There is not a man in the world that could beat Jon Jones in a fight. How would Jon Jones react when missiles are flying at his head from Ngannou, trying to take his head off, blasting his legs, beating up his body, and try to send him into another dimension with every single punch? And a guy who matches his length. Probably going to be the hardest guy to take down out of anybody Jones has ever fought before. Jones' means of winning fights usually come with takedowns. Striking with Ngannou seems to be a disaster waiting to happen. The more you think about the fight, the less you think Jones can win this. But can he do the unthinkable? He is the legend of the sport. If anybody can, it is someone like Jones. My number 3 fight of 2023, and I'm going to be honest, this might not happen in the year, it might happen in 2024, is Alexander Volkanovski versus Ilia Topuria. People might think it's a bit too soon for Ilia, of course, but we're talking about in the future. We're talking about the mid-20-year-old getting even better and finally getting that title shot that we've all been waiting for. And that fight might be the changing of the guard of the featherweight division. But imagine the fight of the young versus the old. He is so much better than the guys around the top 10 right now. He needs to absolutely fight higher. But by the time that him and Volkanovski fight, Volkanovski will be 35 years old, whereas Topuria will be 26. Almost 10 years in between each other, and you could just imagine the skills in that fight. Ilia is going to start the fight with a lot of pressure. He's going to be marching down on Volkanovski with the heavy lead foot, pumping out jabs and inviting counter shots from Volk, just so he can go and line up his own hooks, which will perpetually get Volkanovski to be backpedaling most of the fight to the point where he has to start laterally moving around. And that's where things get very interesting, because you're going to see Volkanovski throw out a bunch of kicks, which is also going to get him to back up. It's going to cause some cumulative damage, and that is his way of putting money in the bank until the later rounds, where he can start landing on Ilia's head. But in the beginning of the fight, Topuria's head is going to be constantly moving, addressing the jabs, and punishing with his own counters. If things get a little bit too heated, you might see Topuria shooting for takedowns, or if he gets Volkanovski as close as he can to the cage, that's when the double leg is going to come from Topuria. And I think the pressure is going to be a little bit too much for Volk in the beginning, where he needs some more time in order to figure out this kind of rhythm. And once he does, Volkanovski is going to be sniping down with the right straight. If that misses, he's going to hop into his left, just like he did against Max Holloway in the third fight. The only issue with that is, it's much harder to hit Topuria with that kind of shot. Topuria's levels are much lower than Max Holloway, which is going to make his head a lot harder to hit, especially with straighter punches. Volk's hooks, though, if he ever adjusts to those, may be his key in order to catch Topuria, and also uppercuts. Techniques that Volk actually doesn't use that often. Volkanovski is much more used to fighting taller opponents, so these uppercuts are not generally something he likes to go to. Against someone like Topuria, who is a little bit taller than him, but the fact that he's almost crouching when he's fighting, that's a quote-unquote shorter opponent for him to tag. And knees might be present, stuff like that. I think the later the fight goes, the more it's going to favor Volkanovski. In the beginning of the fight, it's going to be really dangerous for Volk, because Topuria is going to be forcing a lot of exchanges, and Volkanovski might have no choice but to participate in those. And every time that happens, someone is going to get hurt. Topuria, though, has a very heavy lead foot, which leaves him open to some leg kicks. He has a boxer's approach. Yeah, he does throw kicks himself, but the exchanges between the two fighters would be so technical yet entertaining to watch. The overhands, left hooks, and jabs from Volkanovski meeting the combinations of Topuria, where every single punch is meant to end the opponent. And we've seen Volkanovski in a fight like that before when he fought Chad Mendes. I think he would also welcome the same kind of thing against Topuria, or he would have no choice but to. Topuria's aggression is going to leave Volkanovski with limited options on how to counter it. Yes, he's going to be pumping out a lot of jabs, but Topuria's head is constantly moving. He's going to be parrying. He's going to be expecting the same kind of techniques from Volkanovski like he's been throwing against most other fighters. More lately, Volkanovski has been attacking with power punches more than before. Look at his fight with Max Holloway and Korean Zombie, blitzing in with that right hand. And if he does that against Topuria, Topuria does have that low-centered stance. They're going to meet each other inside of a crazy exchange every single time. And who can make the right decisions in those split seconds mean everything in the fight. It would be one of the highest stakes fights in the featherweight division with the way these two guys approach. And even though I do believe that Volkanovski is and still will be the overall more technical fighter, and also have the higher fight IQ, the advantages of the younger fighters going up against the older is that they've been watching them. They've been studying them for a while. Volk has been champion for a minute, ever since Topuria even came into the UFC. Topuria has been studying him for a while, whereas Volk probably just now started studying Topuria. And that's another advantage going for the younger man. There's a potential of changing of the guard here against one of the greatest fighters we've ever seen. And that goes to my number 2 fight going into 2023, and that is Sean O'Malley versus Marlon Chito Vera 2. Now, I do believe that Volk versus Topuria is a potentially more skillful fight. The reason why I have Chito versus O'Malley above it, it's going to have a different kind of environment around it. There's going to be a different kind of excitement around a big fight like that. It's potentially the biggest bantamweight fight in history when it comes to the amount of people that will be watching it, and his two guys are at the top of the bantamweight division who before were at the lower part of it, and they rose to becoming some of the best fighters in the weight class. They do not like each other. Both guys are decent at talking. Good press conference is going to be involved. Everything about the fight is exactly what you want for a show. The pre-fight antics will be entertaining. O'Malley's going to be on his YouTube channel talking a bunch. Chito's going to be in interviews. They're going to have the press conference, the weigh-ins, the backstage altercations, or whatever they do. The fight itself is going to be extremely fun to watch, and seeing them two shake hands and put it all behind them puts for a fantastic story between two of the best bantamweights today. And they have grown so much since they fought each other before. Chito's much more aggressive now. He's more willing to push the button and shut the opponent out. O'Malley's a lot more technical at a distance, defensively and offensively, and overall has just tweaked his entire skill set. He's also gathering more experience, whereas Chito before had the experience advantage. But Chito will be fighting Corey Sandhagen if he can get past him. He also has that top 5 level experience, just like O'Malley did when he fought Peter Yan. In the entire fight, you're going to see two guys looking to snipe each other, looking for the big shot. It's not going to be an extremely active fight where they're both just constantly throwing punches and kicks at each other. Chito has a low output. O'Malley's a little bit more, but his meaningful punches don't come as often. And especially against Chito, O'Malley's going to be picky of when he throws, as Chito's going to be looking to counter him at every single moment. The leg kick's going to be there as well. I think O'Malley will start to address those in that fight and create more issues for Chito to run into. And it all comes down to who can find that one precise shot through the guard. Both fighters are insanely accurate with their punches and kicks. It's going to come down to, throughout that 5-round fight, who's going to find the chink in the armor first, and whoever does it will either win the fight in a flash, which I think will happen more for Chito, knocking out O'Malley with one shot, or O'Malley starts to find it and keeps attacking it over and over again until either he finishes Chito in the later rounds, which I don't see happening. Chito is extremely durable, but more likely winning by a decision. And that goes to my number 1 fight going into 2023, and that is Khamzat Chimaev versus Shavkat Rakhmonov for the welterweight title. The battle of the titans that have been brewing for years finally happens. The two guys that everybody knows low-key are the best fighters in the weight class, two of the youngest guys in the top 15, both undefeated, almost all finishes between them two, same age, roughly the same size, and very well-rounded. It will be a showcase for the future of the welterweight division on what is to come. The aggressive concussive punches from Khamzat versus the cerebral counter-striking of Shavkat Rakhmonov. Shavkat is a better kicker. Khamzat is getting down the boxing fundamentals with his hands. Overall, you could definitely see where Shavkat is the better overall striker, but you could definitely see where Khamzat is the better overall grappler, specifically when it comes to his wrestling skills. Shooting the single leg takedown on Shavkat is going to be the biggest problem Shavkat has to deal with, and maybe something he won't be able to. But how long can Khamzat hold Shavkat on the ground? That's going to be something very interesting to see. But the amount of times that Khamzat is going to shoot in the fight, when does Shavkat start to get used to it, conditioned to the takedown? And does that eventually cause Khamzat's takedowns to be completely shut down to where now he has to strike with Shavkat? And maybe using the conditioning of his takedowns in order to land his own punches, uppercuts, and overhands. The jab is going to be something very specific in order to catch Shavkat's lack of head movement. And if he could get that down early before Shavkat starts moving his feet away from the punches, because Shavkat's footwork is much better than his head movement, he could potentially hurt him very early in the fight. But at the same time, if Khamzat is committing with his punches, he is so exposed. His head is there to be hit, and Shavkat has some of the better counter-striking in the whole welterweight division right now. His jab and check left hook are so on point, and only going to get even sharper in the future. Khamzat would be in so much trouble if he doesn't punch into takedowns right away. If he commits with his hands, he could start getting stung more than he even anticipated in the fight, and that eventually leads to some distance in between them two. And once that happens, when the momentum gets on Shavkat's side, those precise high kicks could be such an issue for Khamzat, because the thing about Shavkat's kicks are, he doesn't throw them with no meaning. Everything has a reason, and that's why he lands almost every head kick he's thrown. And about the jabs from Khamzat, we have already seen Shavkat deal with Neil Magny's jabs that come from a longer range, are a lot more active and come from both stances, and he dealt very well against those. He got caught by one of them, but just getting caught by one, he immediately got conditioned to it, right? He knew exactly where to move and how to counter it. Countering Neil Magny's jabs is not an easy thing to do, and Shavkat did it very effectively. Everything is extremely calculated, and that is actually the biggest thing that Khamzat is missing right now. But Khamzat has so much power. He's such a good wrestler. He's so tenacious. A lot of people look at them too like they're roughly the same kind of fighter, when in fact they have a complete opposite approach to a fight. Aggressive, tenacious, smothering versus patient, cerebral, and calculated. So those are the fights I'm looking forward to the most in 2023. I know some people might be questioning, where's Islam Makhachev versus Alexander Volkanovski? If I'm going to be honest, the reason why I'm not looking forward to it as much as these fights is because I believe Makhachev is going to run Volkanovski over. I don't think it's going to be that competitive of a fight. And those aren't necessarily the kind of fights I'm mostly looking forward to. So leave in the comments below, what kind of fights are you expecting in 2023 and which fights do you hope happens? I'm really curious what you guys think as well, and I'll see you guys in the next video, which is going to be my prediction for the champions of this year.